I'm going to do a recording today of how to read a poem closely. It is similar to the activity we did with close reading a text. However, when we look at poetry, we look at different aspects of a poem than we do with fiction. So, the document that you see on this screen right now is titled How to Read a Poem. If you go to your resource folder and go to Poetry Explication, there are a few files in there for your use. One of those is this file right here, How to Read a Poem. This is a summary of something that is found in your text starting on page 481 if you want to look at that. Also note that on page 507 there is an example of the poetry explication which you will be doing for your next paper. An explication is and sort of unpacking of a poem, looking at all the various aspects of a poem. What is it the poet is doing? Why? What does this word mean? What is this image doing? What is the overall feeling from these things? So that's what you're going to do with the next essay. So let's quickly go through what's on this How to Read a Poem. First of all, when you read a poem, you just read it at least once just to get a sense of what's in the poem. So read it through first. That's number one right here. First, read through the poem once or twice to get a sense of what it is saying and how the author says it. Then, after you have an idea already, okay, what's going on, then you're going to read through and paraphrase. Number two, read through line by line or stanza by stanza, or try to break it up into sections if it's not broken up, and sort of paraphrase off to the side. What is it saying? What does it mean? Then you're going to look at the title of the poem. Okay, now that we've broken down what is it saying, what does it mean, how does the title relate to the poem itself? How is it appropriate for the poem? You don't have to do these necessarily in this order for most of these. You can do it at any time. Sometimes I like to wait till the very end and go back and look at the title again. Number four, make a statement of what it's about. What is its theme? What is it about? Who is speaking in the poem? Who is the speaker? Oftentimes students think that the speaker is the poet. That's not the case. The poet or a writer in any instance is taking on a persona as they write. It's not necessarily that person. It's not necessarily their story. Determine who's the speaker of the poem. Determine the setting and situation of the poem. So what is going on? Where is this poem taking place? Like a story, it usually has some kind of a setting. There might be some words or phrases to indicate the specific event or occasion in which the poem was created. Also look for specific words and think about what connotations and denotations they hold. Denotations is just the dictionary definition of a word, so sometimes you have to break down the word meanings when we're doing poetry explication, or what other meanings might they hold, what other ideas and connotations might they hold. Also look at the poem's figurative language. What kinds of metaphors and similes, personification, hyperbole, or whatever else is the poet using. Then evaluate what is the mood of the poem. What is the overall feeling that you get from the poem? You could also talk about the poet's tone, their attitude toward the subject. And then you can also look at the form, okay? Look at the rhyme scheme. Does it have an internal rhyme scheme? Does it have an end rhyme? Does it have assonance or consonants? Does it have a specific form that it's following? Is it a sonnet or a haiku, etc.? So determine whether it's following any specific form or rhyme scheme. Okay, I'm going to move this aside. Now, the poem I'm looking at today is in your literature textbook on page 553. This is titled The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop. Okay, I'm going to read it first just so you get a sense of what the poem is. You can look it up online too and find it anywhere online. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of the water with my hook fast in the corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his broken skin hung in strips. His brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. Shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood, that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse white flesh, packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed. The irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, rim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 and a wire leader with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth, a green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, the 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat from the pool of bilge where the oil had spread like a rainbow around the rusted engine, to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks and their strings, the gunwales, until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. Titled The Fish. But it's not just a fish or any old fish. We get a sense through the speaker's discussion about the fish that he or she has a deep appreciation for this fish, perhaps a respect for this fish. The fish is called right away. One of the things I look at is the words, is a tremendous fish. Okay, it's not just I caught a big fish. Yeah, I caught a big fish, cooked it up for dinner. No, I caught a tremendous fish. If you think about tremendous, what does it mean? It could be something really big or something wonderful, or if you think about the Latin root word tremble, okay, maybe it makes her tremble in awe. Okay, I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat half out of the water. Okay, as she goes on, she says, he didn't fight at all. Okay, right here, she creates a sort of personification of the fish. Typically, we talk about animals as an it, but she gives it a gender. It's a he. He didn't fight at all. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. Then she moves on with some description. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight. Notice the sound of fought and awe has the same sound internally right here. Awe, awe. This is creating assonance. That's found in your book with your literary terms. Okay? He hung, grunting. Again, we get the creating repetition of sound. He hung. Even the he hadn't, he hung. Repetition of the sound. That's a consonant sound. The way that she describes the fish, he hung battered and venerable and homely. Very interesting descriptions. What do we mean when something is venerable? Then she moves on to the next several lines, several similes. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full full-blown roses stained and lost through age. Okay, so lots of simile comparing the skin to wallpaper. Okay, he was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime. So here again, the barnacles are being compared. This would be metaphor, being compared to fine rosettes of lime. It's interesting, this right here, this would, I would say, would be a nice juxtaposition of descriptions here, because when you think of barnacles, you think of these scraggly things hanging, which to me are ugly, but then she transitions to fine rosettes of lime. So it's the juxtaposition between ugly and beautiful um, here. So she kind of has mixed feelings about this fish and how she feels. Okay, and then moving along, the fish was infested, interesting word, with tiny white sea lice. Sea lice, because we have barnacles and sea lice, I'm going to say that the setting must be salt water. We don't get a whole lot of other scents. If you look at the list of things that we're looking at, um, what is the setting? It's not so much about the setting for this particular poem. It's much more about the observation fish or she has. You can get a scent in a boat stated in the poem on some kind, and I'm going to say salt water. Other than that, the setting's completely unknown. We also don't know the speaker of this poem, since we're talking about those aspects. It could be a male, it could be a female. Elizabeth Bishop obviously is a female, but this could be either one, a male or female speaker talking about this occasion. Okay, moving along. Um, so we're getting a lot of description of the fish here. So she caught the fish here, and it's hanging, and right here, so if we were going to paraphrase, caught the fish and holding it. Okay, then all of this starts right here, description of the fish. Okay, like I said, if you're paraphrasing as you're going along, it helps to make these notes. Okay, moving along. Okay, so the tiny white sea lice underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. Okay, again, rags of green weed, metaphor here. Also, if we're looking for some more assonance, some more rhyme, green weed has an assonance there, repetition of a vowel sound. His gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen. This is an interesting, the frightening gills. Why would oxygen be terrible? Well, probably because to this fish, it's supposed to be in the water and not out in the open. As you know, if you keep a fish out of water, it will eventually die. And the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood. She creates some really good, strong imagery there. I'm wondering whose blood is the fish's blood, or as she goes on to say, the sharp, the sharp gills can cut so badly. It might be her own blood on the fish if she's been cut by the fish. Moving along. Then she starts to think about right here. So this is all the description of the fish in its exterior. Then she kind of goes into this internal thought here. I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones. So she's talking about things internally. Okay, the big bones and the little bones, and the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails. That's kind of an interesting description there too. And the pink swim bladder like a big peony. Here's a nice simile again. and she's describing it to something beautiful, right? Um, then she continues on to talk about looking into his eyes, um, which were larger than hers, far larger than mine, but shallower and yellow. The iris is backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil. It's an interesting image. Through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. Okay, right here we have a note to what isinglass is, a thin sheet of mica. So think about fish eyes, that's pretty much what they look like. Okay, moving on. I'll get this into view here. Okay, so they shifted a little. So these are the eyes. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. Then she goes on to say, I admired his sullen face. Personification. The mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, again, this would be something that you would describe a human, having human-like qualities, sullen face, his lower lip, and then she kind of corrects herself, if you could call it a lip. Grim, wet, and weapon-like. This is an interesting term, and she proceeds with this image of being weapon-like. Hung 5 old pieces of fish line, 4 and a wire leader with swivels still attached, all with their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread, still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals, with their ribbons frayed and wavering. Okay, right here, first of all, the fish has many hooks and strings attached. This shows that he's been caught a few times, okay? And he's snapped the string, broken and gotten away. So you get the sense that he's old, he's been around the block a few times, he's been caught before, he's gotten away. He's a very strong fish. And then he's made to be like a warrior here, okay? Like a warrior or a hero, decked out in metals with ribbons, frayed and wavering. So those are sort of showing off what he's been through. The 5-haired beard of wisdom, again, a beard of wisdom, personification. Okay. Let's see. Then we transition in the tone. I stared and stared, and victory filled up. This is another important part. This is how she feels, or how the speaker feels about catching the fish. Why victory? Well, as we've said just up here, this is not just any ordinary fish. This is a fish that is old and venerated and has medals with ribbons like a warrior. Okay, so she feels very proud, or he feels very proud of catching this particular fish. It is a victory. Then she goes on to describe the oil in the water, which you've probably seen that effect on rainy days. Oil in the water creating a rainbow. She's sort of stepping back from here, stepping back from the fish and taking in the whole scene, and until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. Notice exclamation point. She's excited. And then I let the fish go. Okay, we have this transition at the end. Why does she let the fish go? Why? If she felt victory and she has caught this fish, why let it go? Interesting. You can answer that yourself. So up here, to go back to some of our paraphrasing, up here we were talking about how she's looking at the fish's eyes, and then the eye is moving but not really to look at her face of the fish, this sense of wisdom in the face, then all the things attached to the fish, the the wires and hooks and things like that, making this comparison to a warrior. And then she has this sense of victory, filled up with a sense of victory, looking around the whole scene, and then letting the fish go in the end. So, as far as the mood of the poem, how does it make you feel? Okay, think about it. Is it a calm poem? It seems very just kind of objective, tells the story, not a lot of emotion, mostly observation about the fish, taking in all the details of the fish. But this must have been a momentous occasion because this poet chose to write about the fish that obviously was a feat to catch. So the fish. That's kind of a little bit about how you can do a close reading of a poem. This particular poem does not have any end rhyme scheme or any particular form to look at. It is just free verse. So I looked a lot more at her word choice and what kind of meanings those held, the figurative language she used. So those are some of the things that you can look at when you do a close reading of a poem. Thank you.